So, as it says on your screen, welcome to the live chat on open science for funders and research managers. I am Emma Harris. I work for a project called ORION, which is the far left icon you can see on your screen. And that is an EU-funded project aimed at increasing the amount of open science in research institutions and funding organizations across Europe. 6 partner countries, consortium, the usual thing. I'm sure you're all familiar with how EU projects work. And so I'm responsible for training. I do events like this. Did you want to introduce yourself, Anne?
Yeah, I will do that. Hello everyone, good morning. I'm Anne Grant, and I suffer from the world's longest job title. I am the Senior Lead for Engaged Research and Public Engagement in the Wellcome Centre for Cultures and Environments of Health. I've popped the web address in the chat box. The Wellcome Centre for Cultures and Environments of Health is funded by the Wellcome Trust, and our vision is to open research to engage multiple publics to increase the value and quality of our research. And I think it's probably worth saying at the beginning that although I work for a centre that is funded by the Wellcome Trust, all the views I'm going to be expressing are my own and shouldn't be taken as anything from the Wellcome Trust itself. I have a personal research interest in open science in that I did a PhD in open science a few years ago. So I'm very much building on that in the work that I'm doing now, but please, these views are my own.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So I think the first part of this live chat is actually that me and Anne have a little chat about open science and kind of give everyone some background. And to do that, what we're going to do is answer some of the most commonly occurring questions that was kind of I get, and I'm sure Anne gets the same kind of questions in her work from researchers and from funders. So as I say, we do training, and we do training workshops for researchers and for funders and research managers. So me and Anne are just going to discuss some of these points for the first sort of 20-30 minutes, and then we will be taking your questions via the live chat, as I think we outlined in the original email. So what do we mean by open science, and how is it similar and different from RRI? So one of the questions we get asked a lot is, okay, I've heard about responsible research and innovation. Is open science the same thing? And I think they are similar, because open science and RRI are about, improving the quality and fairness of research. However, open science is a set of tools and principles focused specifically on ensuring accessibility for both peers, that's other scientists, and the public, so non-professional scientists, to research results and processes. So open science is formed of, I would say, 3 major areas or pillars: open access, open data, and public engagement and science communication. And we're going to talk in more detail, I think, about each of these as we go along. And it includes things like citizen science. But I think for me, open science is about accessibility and about getting out of the ivory tower, as it were. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Anne, to that.
I think broadly speaking, I would agree. I have a slightly different tangent in that I came to open science first as a philosophy before it became a practice. So I think it was, it began 10, 15, 20 years ago as a philosophy that arose about how we do research, and simply as the kind of right way to research, particularly publicly funded research. So it enables, and what I think it enables is things like transparency and accountability, which I think we'll return to. So for me, the kind of pillars of open science would be things like open access to research literature, open access to tools, open data, and open infrastructure. And so for me, those 4 pillars support engagement with research and enable it. But I think broadly speaking, we agree about the principles. Yeah.
I mean, I think, I see it as, I guess because I give training, I see it as very much as a practical set of tools that I can give researchers or give research managers or funders to work with. And I think, yeah, you're coming from it from the I think if you imagine a spectrum of open science with kind of practical tools at one end and a philosophy at the other, and I think we're both coming from the either end of the spectrum and meeting in the middle. So.
And we're moving towards the middle, yes, I think absolutely. I think, it began as a philosophy, but it very much has become a process.
Yes.
And it's become a process, and one of the things in that process for me is that it enables engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Okay, we understand what open science is, or at least where it's coming from. So why should open science matter to those working in funding agencies and research support? So this is kind of the question. Okay, so what's it going to do with me? This is kind of one of the major questions we get. And I mean, again, I think I'm coming from quite a practical perspective, and I say, well, there's a purely economic reason for improving how science is shared and produced. And so the current system, the traditional scientific system, wastes a huge amount of resources and time and equipment and knowledge and everything really, because even within the Western scientific community, and this isn't even talking about more, say, developing world institutions or things like that. So even within the Western scientific community, peers cannot access each other's work effectively. So a scientist can do an experiment and he or she produces results and data. And then that data is not shared and the results are published in a journal which is behind a paywall. So you have the lack of access to data, which means that these experiments cannot be easily reproduced because the original data is not available, which leads to wasted time because the scientists are doing the same experiments over and over again. And indeed, the lack of publishing of negative results is part of this problem. And also less scientific rigor, because the more times you reproduce an experiment, the more likely it is to be a true thing. So if scientists, and then worse still, if scientists are in an institution which doesn't have a relevant subscription to the journal, they cannot even access the article describing the experiment and the results. So essentially, I would say funders are not getting a good return on their, and maybe even more importantly, the taxpayers' investment with closed science. And I think for research managers who you often form, I've worked in research management and research support departments, and I very much feel that these people are often overlooked as the kind of the major bridge between research and funding and that kind of thing. And it can be helpful to demonstrate the benefits of research or potential benefits in research proposals, so things like data management, social impact, collaborations. So these are easier if you're implementing open science. Yeah. Anne, do you have any thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you on the question of value and wastage. I mean, I often use a practical example when I'm talking about it. So my son, for example, did a PhD in experimental psychology. So he's using lab animals as part of his experiments, and which obviously have a cost and also a moral cost, if you like. And he did an experiment which failed. It didn't prove what he wanted it to prove, or what he hoped it would prove. By not enabling others to know that, other people might fall into that same question and repeat that same result, which has an economic value in terms of the cost of researchers' time, but as I say, it also has a moral value in terms of wasting laboratory animals. So I think that point is huge, the sharing that it enables increases the value. And I think more philosophically, I'm approaching you on the practical spectrum, but I'm still thinking philosophically, it just produces better research. And I think, if we don't want to do good research, then there's a reason. So, it extends that sharing. And I don't just mean with immediate colleagues, although that's important. with fellow researchers, although that's important, but with wider communities. I mean, particularly coming from a centre that is looking at questions of health and cultures and environments of health. It's really important to us to extend our research to bring in collaborators from outside the university, or from outside the research system, if you like. Because those, by opening up our research, by bringing in, by working with collaborators, you know, we increase the kind of expertise, the kind of experience, the kind of understandings that we as researchers alone can't have. You know, those kinds of skills and experiences that single researchers or even single groups of researchers don't have. So it's not just about reuse of information, it's just about sharing in that way. It's also about bringing in and opening up research to new collaborators.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's really important. And it kind of always, even though I've been doing this for a while now, it always baffles me that the way the system is kind of set up, so that you have taxpayer money, government, state funding, feeding into a system, which then you have, say, the journals, who are for profit, making money off of that. And it seems to be a very odd way of doing things, like just economically speaking. But I think, as you say, I think there's also a moral and a philosophical issue there, in terms of, you know, we should be sharing knowledge both with peers and with society in general. I think
most researchers come into research to do that. You know, yes. We want to share. We want to make that difference, and the way that we enable ourselves to make that difference is through sharing. And I think most people would say that they wanted to share. There would be very, very few people who go, "No, it's mine. Go away. It's precious." You know, we do it because we want to share. We want to make a difference, and we want to enable our colleagues to make a difference. I think that's the crucial nature of open science.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I think that, and I think people do get that kind of Gollum, you know, mine precious, but because the system is stacked against their ability to share.
Yeah.
So that if they fear sharing because they fear losing out on career and funding and so forth. And that's why I think it's so important for funders and research managers to be involved in this process.
To be positive.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we'll just drill down for a bit and talk about some of the three aspects that I outlined, just so everyone's clear on kind of where we're coming from. And then we can ask, as I say, we'll be answering your questions via the live chat chat box function. Should have done my diction lessons this morning. Chat box function. So we'll be answering your questions. So, you know, if you have any, pop them in the chat now, or just scribble them on a piece of paper. Okay. So I think most people have heard of open access. But I think there's a lot of confusion about exactly what it means and exactly what the kind of the current situation is. So, I mean, from my point of view, the thing I tend to go over is preprints, because people have heard of that less. So this is when there is a subject-specific archive, a digital archive, and researchers can upload a version of their manuscript before it goes for peer review. And this has a number of benefits, including, you know, flag in the sand, so it marks who came up with the idea first, and also sometimes there's a community peer review and so forth. But also it can mean that you don't have to wait to go through the very long 12, 18-month publishing process before you can say, I've published findings on this research. And several funders actually accept preprint, so that's really cool. And about 80% of journals will accept a preprint after, will accept an article even if it's been published as a preprint, because it's so different once it's gone through peer review and been formatted, etc. So that's preprint. So that's a slightly like adjacent thing to open access, though of course they are open access. And then, of course, there's the two main routes, green and gold. So gold costs money, but the articles are immediately open access. Green is free, and the researcher self-archives, or their institution archives the paper, but there's an embargo period when it is still behind a paywall. So between 3 and 18 months, depending on the discipline. But Plan S may change all that. Do you think, did I cover everything, Anne, or?
Yeah, I think that's a simple, I think that's the basics that everybody will understand, that know about,
Yeah, I mean, we could have just a thing on open access.
We could go into that, but we won't.
We won't, yeah. So I'm actually, Plan S is something that sort of never quite gets straight in my brain. But I get asked about it increasingly. People are starting to hear about it. And do you have any clearer idea what the situation is?
I mean, I know what Plan S is, which is, this initiative for open access publishing, and it comes from Coalition S, and it's a number of state agencies, major funders, all those kind of from across Europe, and indeed some in the US as well. But I think people are progressing that move towards the signing up to Coalition S at different rates, so different funders. And, I know, for example, we've had conversations about this with the Wellcome Trust, and they have a particular approach to Plan S, which is on their website, so if anybody's Wellcome Trust funded, they can look that up. But they are being very open to discussions, especially with researchers who are coming from different fields.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to keep your eye on, because I think people to keep their eye on, and something that I would suggest that if you're in a university or a similar institution, you should go and talk to your librarians about, because they will have a much better sense of which journals are doable under Plan S, or are publishable under Plan S. And that's going to be different for different funders and different institutions. So I would strongly suggest the people to talk to are your librarians or people in that kind of role.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there are a variety of reactions, because, I mean, the very simple thing is that Plan S will make it compulsory for anyone who receives funding from the organization to have signed up to it to publish open access, gold open access, i.e. pay money straight away. And I mean, I think various people are worried. Some it doesn't make a difference to. So for instance, in the life sciences, you often have to pay several thousand to publish anyway, because of color figures and this kind of thing. I mean, it's insane, right? We live in a digital world, but don't get me started on that. But in the humanities, it's not so common to pay to publish. So now it's like, will it actually be more expensive than it was before? And therefore, you're actually reducing accessibility rather than increasing.
Yeah, and there's also different publishing cultures.
Yeah.
The sciences and the humanities.
Yeah.
Often in the humanities, it will be focused on a monograph. So I think, this is not something that you can give a kind of pan-European or pan-funder response to. I think it's something you really need to talk about to your funder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is why I dread the question, because I kind of go, well, it depends, which nobody wants to hear, obviously. So another thing I get asked is, well, and then this kind of goes back to, the system is built a certain way and you kind of have to live within it, which is fair enough. So metrics is something that comes up a lot. So researchers will say to me, well, it's all well and good, but if I'm going for funding, the metrics used to measure my researcher quality is the impact factor and the publication rate. So what journals do I publish in? How high is their impact factor? And how often and much do I publish? Which is, unfortunately, it is true. Not all funders, of course, and not all hiring committees, but it is. It's a problem. So I was I'm not an evangelical kind of open science person. I'm quite middle of the road, centrist, if you like. But I talked to some more kind of activist researchers, such as Bjorn Brems, and he convinced me with a lot of scientific kind of credibility that basically metrics are a bit of a scam. And I would love to see funders and hiring committees use other metrics. I mean, I think the ref is actually, though it has its downside, shall we say, in the UK, at least has some attempt to include wider variety of factors in awarding funding, which is good. Just possibly it's kind of becomes so large that it's slightly, it takes over everything, I think, like some kind of huge, I don't know, alien or something.
Metrics are a hugely difficult thought, and this kind of addresses one of the questions that's come up in the chat box, which is from Joshua. And Martin, I acknowledge you're quite right. We shouldn't confuse gold open access with article processing charges. That's really important, and again, it's something to engage with your funders around. This just goes to show the kind of complexity of the landscape that we're dealing with here. But I think, as Josh was saying, this whole idea of career progression and metrics is a very tricky area to negotiate, especially for early career researchers. And I think the point about metrics is that they are a proxy. They're a quick way to measure, and I put that in strong inverted commas, research quality. And I think where we get confused is in kind of making metrics an absolute measure, which they never can be, which I think is something that Bjorn Bremsit is saying, isn't it? That they are very much a proxy. So I think you're right. I think we need to think about a wider variety of factors in our funding, not just the kind, oh, you've published in Nature, so it must be fantastic. The journal is no guarantee of the quality of the research. It might be that the really fabulous research goes off into one journal, but equally, it in itself is no guarantee. And as I said earlier, I am not speaking for the Wellcome Trust as a whole, but I know the policy of the Wellcome Trust, when we had a workshop with the head of open research earlier this year. He's very much thinking that the trust will be thinking about the quality of the research itself. If it's good research, it should be published, and to an extent where it is published is much less important.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to balance with metrics.
Absolutely. And I mean, I obviously you've got to have some quantitative measurement, otherwise you just time-wise it's not possible. But I think that at the moment it's sort of like the quantitative measurement is a pure, and it needs to be sort of much more balanced.
It needs to be balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. And just returning, since we already started answering it, to Joshua's question, what I often say is, we appreciate that early career researchers often are not in a position of power. Do what you can. If you can publish a preprint and then publish a paper in Nature, fine, do that. Or if you can give a talk on your science, do that. If you can make your data set open, do that. Do what you can, as much as you can. And then when you are in a more secure position career-wise, then maybe start really making, everything open.
I think that's right, yeah. Everybody exists, has to find their place on that spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people are, they're open science through and through from the start, and it pays off for them. But I completely understand how insecure academic careers are. Part of the reason I didn't, after my PhD, go into academia proper and move sideways into research project management was because I just couldn't face the how difficult it is to get a job, basically. So I am very sympathetic to how difficult it is to be the person who makes that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on to open data. So there's a lot of confusion just generally between fair and open data, and whether they're the same or whether they're different. I think it's very important that they are actually different, because data can be fair and not open, and it can be open but not fair. So fair stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if you take a data set and you dump it on your own website, it's open. Anybody can see it. Anyone can see that it's there. You know, the public, your fellow scientists, whatever. However, it's not findable because your website is not going to come up in any kind of searches or databases. How would anyone know to look? It's not accessible in the sense that it's not presented in a way that ensures understanding. It's just numbers on a screen. It's not interoperable because it's not formatted. So it's not formatted to be machine readable. And it's not reusable because there's no license for it, such as CC by NC. So a Creative Commons license. So just because it's there, does that mean I can use it, or can I not use it? Or, you know, without a license, it's not, the legality of it is not clear. You wouldn't be confident. So that's an example of an open data set that is not fair. Conversely, you can put a data in a permission-only database where it is fair, but researchers who want access to it must ask because, say, it's sensitive, it deals with, I don't know, development of viruses or medical data or so forth. So I actually did a paper on this in my last job on data governance, and these big databases where you have to show, sometimes you have to show ethics approval for your project just to get at the data if it's really, you know, sensitive stuff. But it is still fair because it's findable and it is accessible, but with permission. So I think those are two really key things that have been brought up, and it's really good to understand that that difference.
Yeah, I mean, and that brings me to the importance of something you've mentioned as well, is data management plans.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly, again, with the support of, this is where research managers are crucial, is ensuring that that everyone thinks about what their data is going to comprise, where it's going to be stored, how it's going to be reusable and interoperable, and all those kinds of things that you've mentioned under the FAIR. Because if you don't do that right back at the beginning, it will be hopeless to try and do it at the end when you've got data and you know your way through it, but can anybody else find their way through it? And that, you know, that doesn't just apply to, you know, numerical data sets. That applies just as much to qualitative data sets. So I think having a data management plan is, and again, thinking about open access and open science tools at that stage can make the plan for openness further down the line much more doable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big believer in data management plans, and also I come from kind of an ethics background. So I was the ethics manager on the Human Brain Project, and before that, research integrity officer. So I'm very much of the mindset of let's set up all the rules for this project before the project starts. You know, who's going to publish, who's going to be cited, and where's the data going to go, and, you know, everything like that. So I come from that kind of mindset of let's establish things early.
No, I couldn't agree more. And when I'm talking to students and we're thinking about ethics and applying for ethics approval, it's not scary. Actually, for me and for research managers, I think it offers an opportunity to just think through those questions that might be coming up and have some and lay some ideas out. And I think, you know, ethically we should do that, you know, as soon in the project as we possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Ethics actually is a nice segue, because the next question that I often get asked is, okay, you want us to have open data. And again, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what open data means. And you get life science researchers saying, you're kidding me. I work with, you know, pediatrics. You want me to put children's data on the internet? Like, no, it's not what we want. So I get these questions about, well, okay, what about ethics, sensitive data, and what about commercialization? So for the first question, I say what I've just said. FAIR is not open, and you can make your data secure without making it inaccessible. Also, there are so many tools now for anonymization and pseudo-anonymization, which you can and should utilize as researchers. For the second question, it is more complicated, and it's one of those it depends things. So, you know, researchers will say, well, what if I can, you know, patent something, or can I, you know, use my data for a pharmaceutical company or whatever. But I think sometimes some data can be made fair and open, and sometimes not all of it. And I think at the end of the day, you really have to talk to your tech transfer or your research and business departments. And I think they need to be open. So if you kind of work in one of those departments or adjacent to them, one thing that you can really do is talk to your colleagues about fair and open data and get yourself up to speed on that. So I think it's really important to try and get that message out to other colleagues.
Yeah, it's about, it echoes what you were saying earlier, it's about doing what you can.
Yes, yes.
It's about doing what you can. And if there comes a point when you can't, if up to that point you have been open and transparent, people are much more likely to be understanding and get the reason why for that one particular area. Maybe it's to do with personal information. You can't. So I think, you know, it's do what you can is a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to public engagement, often what I get asked when I do funding and research manager workshops is, do you really think that science, public engagement, science outreach, science communication is a good use of grant money? And I understand the skepticism to a certain extent. I can see why there may be some hesitation in giving money that can often, you know, maybe it doesn't feel like it's kind of producing results. It's not hard science. But I believe it is, both for scientists and society, a good use of money. I think we are facing a massive lack of trust in science and a lot of the growth of pseudoscience. And I don't think we're going to be able to improve things unless the public improves their ability to understand and engage with science. And unfortunately, that responsibility falls on all of us, everyone who's involved in the scientific community, scientists and science support. I'm using science in the European way, by the way, to mean research. It's synonymous with research.
Research, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
research. I totally agree. You know, if we think about engagement with research, then practicing open research, you know, simply enables more and multiple publics to engage with that research. And I think particularly in the current political climate, you know, where the role of experts is being questioned, open science has a huge role to play in maintaining transparency and accountability, and thus sustaining that vital trust between researchers and society. And I think maybe I'm in an unusual position in the UK, in that certainly UK funders are very open to the idea of engagement with research, improving researchers' quality and being a vital part of what researchers do. So we often, you know, there are funders in the UK who will specifically offer money for engagement. And what we have to do is to be very careful that that money is in fact being used for the purposes that it was given for. So, you know, I think, yes, just the answer is yes, it is. It is a good to use money, full stop.
Yeah, I absolutely, yeah. I'm very, very strongly in the belief that we should be encouraging science communication as much as possible. One last question is the obvious one. So I guess this kind of encompasses a lot of things, but how can funders and research managers support open science? So before we answer that, if you've got any questions, start putting them in the chat box now, and we'll start answering them after we've kind of kick things off with this umbrella question, I think. So, so in terms of funders as organizations and as individuals working directly for funders, I think lobbying to direct more funds towards open science initiatives is a great way to support open science. So including money for gold open access or for public engagement, create more support for open science by encouraging data management plans that have fair principles, including or allowing preprints on the publication list, and reducing the importance of impact factors, I think, is a key thing. Yeah, and research managers, you know, if you can encourage your researchers to think of open science and think of open science tools.
I think that's absolutely, I think, you know, you're absolutely right. For funders, it's that positivity, it's that openness to openness, if that makes sense, and encouragement and support, because, you know, if you can have a carrot or a stick, and you can either dangle the carrot of this will make your research better, and what we want to do is to fund better research, or you can apply the stick of either do it or else. And I think it's better to dangle the carrot, if at all possible, and just to be very positive about it. And I think a lot of funders are. And in terms of research managers, I think, again, it's about being positive. And it's about building in support and skills training to enable your researchers not just to be open, but to be open effectively, making the best possible use of their limited time and resources. So it might be training, it might be support, it might be skills training, it might be connecting with other communities in your institution. You know, as I've said before, higher education institutions, at least in the UK, will offer lots of support. You know, it might be a publication repository, it might be a data repository. You know, there's not necessarily a need to invent the wheel. So I think something research managers can do is to take that time to find out what's already available, so that we don't try and do things again and again and again. You know, what is there? What is available to researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I worked, like I say, in an office, and there were people on pre and post award, and I can see opportunities in retrospect of times in that cycle, research cycle, where open science could have very easily been inserted and applied. So I think that's worth bearing in mind. Yeah, okay. So we had some questions on the form, actually, which one of them was actually directed at you, Anne. It says, to Anne, from your experience, what are the main challenges with implementing open science in funding organizations, i.e. opening up the processes and involving the public? What are the main benefits for the funders, for the public? Do the public always want to be involved? Do you have any best practices to share? That's quite a complex question.
Yeah. And I'll try and answer it briefly so that we get some time for others to answer questions. But I think some of the challenges we've already touched on. You know, we've touched on researchers' confidence. Some researchers, you know, you have to take gentle steps to openness sometimes. And particularly for early career researchers that are, you know, are working with bosses, superiors, supervisors that were brought up in a very different tradition, questioning that tradition can sometimes be a bit difficult. So it's about having the confidence to take little steps.
Yeah.
And that whole kind of, you know, it's precious, it's mine attitude is something that we have to chip away at gradually. But you can do that by setting up good practices. You know, you can maybe say, okay, I'm going to have a data management plan. Yeah. And that will be my small step that I'm making. But I think, you know, equally, when you're having those conversations, you know, you need to think about the benefits. And particularly for me, the huge benefit is in that opening up of research to wider publics, to bringing in skills and expertise and experience that you wouldn't otherwise have. And, you know, I also something is this sense of kind of dipping into the well twice. No two people dip into the well and get the same bucket of water out. So it might be that you can go back and you can reuse somebody else's data. You can use an existing database to ask it a different question.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of publics, well, you know, no, not everyone will want to be involved. But I think that's where we go wrong when we talk about the public. You know, there's no way that the whole entire public of Europe will want to be involved in open science. They're just not going to be interested. But I think different publics will be interested in different things. So think about the kind, in terms of best practices, think about the kind of publics that you want to, the ideal public, if you like, that you would like to be involved in your work. You know, whether that's a group of people that are living with a certain condition, or are living in a certain place or have a certain area of interest. And think about those people rather than trying to think about this massive undifferentiated public. Citizen science is a useful analogy here, you know.
Yeah.
Lots of different projects. No one person does everything. We pick the thing that we are most interested in, whether it's, you know, birds or butterflies or environmental monitoring. So I think, the key best practice for me is to think about the kinds of publics that you would like to be involved in your work or open your work to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that covers everything I would have said as well. Okay. So we have a question on the chat. One particular problem area is research data based on third-party commercial data sets. Yep. It would be interesting to know if any funders would fund a project that opens at previous project outputs to increase engagement as a primary project outcome. That's an interesting idea. Yeah.
I think it is. I mean, it kind of touches on what you mentioned earlier and what I've been saying, this idea of reuse.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I know of any projects that have done that.
Yeah.
But I don't see why, if it was a really good research question and a sound piece of research, they wouldn't be up for that.
Yeah.
It again addresses this question of value. So I think it's definitely something to talk to your potential funders about.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I mean, some of the stuff I've been talking about in terms of data governance, data management plans, open access, if, you know, researchers are doing an EU project, this is par for the course. Anyway, this is standard operating procedures anyway. So, I mean, I do think that there is definitely room to make, you know, to do things differently and to use data differently in these projects. And I think funders are more and more on the lookout for ways that research can be sustainable. I think that's the new kind of buzzword at the moment, sustainability, you know?
Yeah.
We've got to recycle everything, guys. It's not just your crisp packets anymore, it's your research. Okay, another question. So what advice can you offer to those of us seeking to bridge the gap between funder-publisher policies and expectations and real-world academic attitudes and practices? Wow, yeah, that's a
biggie.
That's a biggie. Yeah, it is. I think, yeah. I mean, I think you're going to, on both sides, get intransient. So you're going to get funders who are like, we did this, you know, in 1998, we're going to do it today, and that's the end of it. And you're going to get researchers who say, no, I don't want any of this RRI open access stuff. I just want to do my very traditional research. And that's, you know, if you're stuck between either of those, that's difficult. However, most people, I think, on both sides are very open to openness, actually, you know, when they're shown how useful it can be and what the benefits can be. And particularly researchers, as Anne said earlier, most researchers go into research because they want to share their knowledge, because they want to discover things and they want to share that knowledge with their peers and with the world. So I often kind of rebrand open science as how to share your knowledge with the world more effectively. And that seems to really turn a light bulb on for a lot of researchers. And yeah, I mean, I've been that person. So I was actually the person who had to take the top-down research integrity policies and somehow make them institutional practice. But I find this approach of just do as much as you can, when you can, with what you've got, really, I think it connects with people because I think people feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think what's crucial is to think about the evidence that you're gathering by doing that. So if you share your data set, make your data set accessible and fair, then keep track of it. Who's using it? Who asked to use it? What did they say about it? And this, you know, if you wrote a blog and you talked about your work, how many people read it? Who looked at it? How many people, keep track of that kind of evidence, because what researchers respect is evidence. And if you can say, yes, well, I did that, and actually 1,000 people read this preprint, that is super strong evidence, whether for funders and for managers to say, okay, hadn't thought about that, but that sounds like a good thing. And that's again a role that research managers is to keep encouraging people to keep track of those kinds of fleeting, sometimes, pieces of evidence. That it's not just, here it is, but engaging with who engaged with it. It becomes increasingly important. And then you can turn that evidence around, maybe when it's your next funding application or whatever, you can say, we have evidence of the kinds of people and who are engaging with our work through its open access. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's one of the key things, and what you said at the start, particularly, the evidence-based. Researchers really respond to that. Of course they do. There's plenty of resources out there that can show you, kind of statistics for instance. I mean, there's been studies done on the citation rate of open access publications. So kind of follows logic, really, right? So if more people can access your paper, more people will cite your paper. That's just like one small example of the way in which you can kind of demonstrate that evidence of open science being useful. So any questions? We're kind of coming towards the end now. So if you've got any last questions, do put them in the chat box. One more question from the form was specifically about the REF. So how can institutions use REF 2021 to stimulate PIs to ensure they have skills available for stewardship of data and to ensure it is as open as possible and as closed as necessary? Anne, do you want to maybe say a little bit about the REF, because that's going to be more your area than mine at the moment?
It really isn't, and I'd hesitate to say anything about it, but I think one thing we can say about the REF is that they have, in the UK, the Research Excellence Framework, is that they have broadened the base of what can be taken in as information to support the REF. And it kind of harks back to what I was saying just now about, stewardship of data is not only curating it, but it's also understanding who has engaged with it. So I think it's, this is taking those standards of evaluating social, economic, industrial, and other kinds of impact is the way to stimulate PIs, to understand, what skills do I need to get so that I can think about how I'm using my data as well as possible. And that's the kind of evidence that will feed back. So, I'm not an expert on the REF, it's just kind of there. But I think it's about understanding what open research in general can enable you to understand about your research and about how it's the kinds of impacts it's having, and being open to different kinds of impacts. I feel I've overused the word open quite a lot.
An impact.
An impact, yes.
So, I did work on the REF, so basically the cleanup operation from REF 20, whatever it was, and then some of the preparation for REF 2021 before I left to live in Berlin. It wasn't the REF that made me leave, by the way. But anyway, so quite honestly, you can get researchers to do a lot of things they won't normally make an effort to do if you say that it's important for the REF. And that's very cynical, but it's something I have observed, shall we say. Open access really took off where in the institution I was at, when it became, it could be linked to the ref in terms of, you know, citations and what have you. So I think, you know, you can use it in that cynical way, but I think also, I actually don't think the ref is a bad idea. I think sometimes it is gamed, and I think sometimes it is executed perhaps clumsily. But I think the idea of ensuring that the society benefits from research is a good one. I think the idea of assessing research quality in terms of funding is actually a good one. So I think some of the core ideas are good, and maybe being able to communicate that to researchers and saying, look, this is actually a way of doing things better, is a way forward. I think there are sections in the REF 2021 assessment that are specifically about, you know, data stewardship and open access, and obviously impact, if you're talking about public engagement. So
I think institutions can definitely use the carrot of those elements of the art. And that's not just institutions in the UK, you know, all sorts of countries around the world are starting to think about the impact of research and how it can be understood. So I think it's about institutions finding those elements in the REF that can be used to support people and to convince them of the value of data curation and data stewardship.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Okay. So we're nearly out of time. I can't see any further questions on the group chat. You are, of course, most welcome to email either me or Anne. So you will have received an email from the Orion mailbox, the Orion project, about the sign-up details for this, for the Zoom link, and Anne was CC'd in on that. So if you have any questions, you know, you're going about your day and you think, oh, should have asked them that, please feel free to do so. And thank you very much for attending. And this is being recorded, so we'll be sending out some clips probably, rather than the whole thing. Depends on how it goes. Okay.
Depends how fabulous we've been.
Yeah, yeah, we'll see how good it is, and then we'll send you something. Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you. So a couple of people have said thank you to us. I really appreciate it. Thanks. And we might be running another event like this in early 2020. Yeah, tell all your friends. Yeah.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I just want to say thank you to everyone for sparing the time out of their day to listen and to engage with this. Absolutely back up your point that if there's anything, you know, if you want to email me, that's absolutely fine. I am really wonderful at email, so please do. And yeah, thank you, Emma. It's been really interesting to have this conversation with you.